Imagine a world where those who work strategically, build genuine value, and understand human psychology achieve lasting success and influence. Sounds idealistic, right? But now look around you carefully. Who has truly sustainable power? Those who burned every bridge to get to the top, or those who built networks of genuine loyalty and created real value? The answer might surprise you. There's a popular narrative that says the world belongs to the ruthless, that ethics are a weakness, that manipulation is just being smart. But if you look deeper at history, at business, at actual power dynamics, you'll see something more complex. Yes, some ruthless people rise quickly, but watch what happens to them over time. How many maintain their position? How many don't eventually fall victim to the very tactics they used on others? The brutal truth isn't that nice guys finish last. The brutal truth is that sustainable power requires something most people don't develop: strategic intelligence combined with ethical awareness. Not because morality is some cosmic law, but because it's practically effective in the long run. Today we'll explore a different understanding of power, one based on Nietzsche's actual philosophy, rather than distorted interpretation. We'll look at why creating value is more powerful than extracting it, why building loyalty beats forcing compliance, and why the most effective strategies often align with ethical principles not despite them, but because of them. This isn't a fairy tale about good always winning. It's a realistic analysis of what actually creates lasting influence in a complex world. The question isn't whether you should be good or ruthless. The question is, do you want quick dominance that collapses, or sustainable influence that compounds? Since you were born, you've been exposed to two competing narratives. One says the world rewards virtue, hard work and goodness. The other says only the ruthless succeed, that ethics are for losers, that manipulation is the real game. But here's what both narratives miss. They're oversimplifications of a far more complex reality. Let's be clear. Naive idealism doesn't protect you. Believing that good things come to those who wait, or that the universe rewards good people, is dangerous wishful thinking. The world doesn't operate on cosmic justice. But the cynical opposite is equally false. The belief that ruthlessness always wins, that ethics have no practical value, that sustainable power comes from pure domination. Real power dynamics are more sophisticated than either extreme suggests. Yes, some unethical people succeed, but if you study their trajectories carefully, you'll notice patterns. Many rise quickly, but fall hard. They create enemies, burn relationships, lose trust. When crisis comes, and it always does, eventually they have no one to rely on. Others do maintain power, but at enormous psychological and social cost. They live in constant paranoia, unable to truly trust anyone, isolated by their own tactics. Now contrast this with a different approach. Strategic competence combined with genuine value creation, building real skills that make you indispensable, creating actual value that others benefit from, developing relationships based on mutual benefit rather than pure manipulation. This isn't about being nice in some simplistic sense. It's about understanding that human beings are complex, that trust is a valuable resource, that reputation has compound effects over time, and that sustainable power often comes from being genuinely useful rather than merely dominant. Meet Marcus, the 38-year-old executive who spent the first decade of his career believing that ruthlessness was the path to power. He stepped on colleagues to advance, took credit for others' work, manipulated situations to his advantage, and cultivated a reputation as someone you didn't want to cross. And it worked for a while. Marcus climbed rapidly to a senior position at a tech company. He was feared, which he confused with respected. People complied with his demands, which he mistook for loyalty. He had titles and salary increases, which he thought meant he had real power. Then the company went through a major crisis, a hostile takeover attempt. This was the moment when Marcus discovered the difference between dominance and actual power. When he needed allies, he found he had none. The colleagues he'd stepped on were happy to watch him fall. The people he'd manipulated felt no loyalty when he needed support. The board members he'd played political games with saw him as a liability rather than an asset. Meanwhile, his peer Sarah, someone he'd always viewed as too soft, emerged as the natural leader during the crisis. Why? Because she'd spent years building genuine relationships, creating real value, developing a reputation for competence and integrity. When crisis hit, people rallied around her not out of fear, but because they trusted her judgment and wanted to support someone who'd supported that. Marcus wasn't fired, but he was sidelined. And for the first time, he had to confront an uncomfortable reality. What he'd thought was power had been mere positional authority. Real power, the kind that sustains through crisis, belonged to those who'd built different kinds of relationships. This crisis forced Marcus to question everything he believed about how power worked. Let's talk about what Nietzsche actually believed, because it's been badly distorted. Nietzsche did talk about the will to power, but this has been misunderstood. He wasn't advocating for dominating others or ruthless manipulation. The will to power was about self-overcoming, about pushing beyond your current limitations, about creating your own values rather than passively accepting what others tell you. Nietzsche's critique of slave morality wasn't a call to abandon all ethic. It was a critique of resentment-based morality, of people who justify their powerlessness by pretending it's virtue, of reactive rather than active value creation. His ideal, the Übermensch, wasn't a ruthless tyrant. It was someone who creates their own meaning, who takes responsibility for their choices, who doesn't need external validation but builds from internal strength. Here's the key distinction that gets lost. Nietzsche was against passive, resentment-based goodness, the kind where people are good only because they lack the courage to pursue what they want, where they justify weakness as virtue. But he wasn't advocating for cruelty or manipulation. He was advocating for active, creative strength, the ability to shape your own life according to values you consciously choose. In practical terms, this means don't be good out of fear or to gain approval, but don't confuse strength with the ability to harm others. Real strength lies in self-mastery, in the ability to create value, in the courage to pursue your authentic path, while taking responsibility for the consequence. The distorted interpretation that Nietzsche says, "Be ruthless," completely misses his actual philosophy of life affirmation, creativity, and the courage to define your own values consciously, rather than reactively. Here's a principle that cuts through both naive idealism and cynical manipulation. Sustainable power comes from creating genuine value, not because the universe rewards goodness, but because value creation has practical advantages over value extraction. Think about it strategically, not morally. When you extract value manipulating, exploiting, taking credit, you create a one-time gain. But ongoing costs. You generate resentment. You burn relationships. You create enemies who will work against you when opportunity arises. When you create value building real skills, solving actual problems, making others' lives genuinely better, you generate compound returns. People want to work with you because you make them more successful. Your reputation opens doors. Your network strengthens because people benefit from connection with you. Let's look at real examples. In business, companies that focus purely on extraction, squeezing employees, manipulating customers, externalizing costs, often have short-term profits, but long-term fragility. When market conditions change, they have no loyalty to rely on. Compare this to companies that genuinely create value, solving real problems, treating employees well, building customer loyalty. They have more resilience because they've built actual relationships and real value. In personal careers, the people with most sustainable influence aren't those who manipulated their way up. They're the ones who became genuinely excellent at something valuable, who built reputations for competence and reliability, who made others successful. This isn't about being nice, it's about understanding that in a complex, interconnected world, your reputation and relationships are assets with compound value. Value extraction depletes these assets. Value creation grows them. The strategic question isn't should I be good or ruthless, it's do I want extractive power that depletes, or creative power that compounds. There's a resource more valuable than money, connections, or positional authority, yet most people squander it thoughtlessly. Trust. Trust is the foundation of all sustainable influence. Without it, you can have compliance, but not genuine cooperation, obedience but not initiative, fear but not loyalty. And here's the critical insight. Trust is easy to destroy and very difficult to rebuild. Every time you manipulate, betray, or exploit, you make a withdrawal from your trust account. You might gain something in the short term, but you've damaged a resource that has enormous long-term value. Conversely, every time you keep your word, act with integrity, and deliver genuine value, you make a deposit. These deposits compound over time, creating a reputation that opens doors, generates opportunities, and provides resilience during crisis. Marcus learned this the hard way. During the company crisis, he discovered that all his political maneuvering and manipulation had left him with a negative trust balance. When he needed people to vouch for him, to go out of their way to support him, to give him the benefit of doubt, nobody did. Meanwhile, Sarah had built such a strong trust account that people actively wanted to help her succeed. Not because she was soft or naive, but because she'd proven over years that supporting her was a good investment. Here's the practical implication. Treat trust as your most valuable asset. This doesn't mean being naive or failing to protect yourself from bad actors. It means being strategic about when and why you risk your reputation. Ask yourself before any action, is this short-term gain worth the long-term trust cost? Often it is. I want you to think honestly about your own approach to power and influence. Are you building sustainable influence or just seeking temporary dominance? Here's a reflective exercise. Make a list of the 5 most important relationships in your professional or personal life. For each one, honestly assess. Is this relationship based primarily on fear, obligation, or manipulation? Or is it based on mutual value creation, trust, and genuine respect? If it's the former, ask yourself, what happens when circumstances change? When you no longer have positional authority over them, when they have other options? If it's the latter, recognize This is a compounding asset that will serve you through changing circumstances. Now think about your reputation. If people who know you professionally were asked confidentially what they really think of you, what would they say? Competent and trustworthy, or effective, but watch your back. Both might get you results in the short term, but which creates sustainable influence over decades? Share in the comments. Have you ever seen someone rise through ruthless tactics, only to fall hard later? Or someone build slower, but create lasting influence through value creation? Understanding these patterns in others helps you make better strategic choices for yourself. This isn't about morality for morality's sake. It's about recognizing which strategies actually work in the long term. Let's address the elephant in the room. I'm not suggesting you should be a pushover or that ethics means being naive. Strategic ethics means understanding that certain ethical principles have practical advantages, not just moral appeal. Take honesty, for example. The naive version is always tell the truth because lying is wrong. The strategic version is build a reputation for honesty because it makes your words valuable. When people know you don't bullshit, your endorsements matter. Your warnings are taken seriously. Your promises are believed. This creates influence. Or consider fairness. The naive version is treat everyone equally because it's the right thing to do. The strategic version is create systems where talented people can succeed based on merit because this attracts and retains the best people, giving you competitive advantage or loyalty. The naive version is be loyal to everyone always. The strategic version is be loyal to those who deserve it, and be known as someone who rewards loyalty with loyalty, because this creates a network of people invested in your success. The pattern here is recognizing that many ethical principles survive not just because they're nice, but because they're effective at creating stable, productive human systems. This doesn't mean ethics always align with short-term advantage. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you in the immediate term. The strategic question is what kind of person do you want to be known as? And what kind of networks do you want to build? Marcus discovered that rebuilding his approach around strategic ethics didn't make him weak, it made him more effective. He learned to keep his word consistently, which made his commitments valuable. He learned to give genuine credit, which made talented people want to work with him. He learned to have difficult conversations honestly rather than manipulating, which created real solutions rather than temporary fix. Here's something that separates sustainable power from fragile dominance: resilience during crisis. When everything is going well, different power strategies can look equally effective. The difference becomes stark when crisis hits. Marcus experienced this directly. During the hostile takeover, his authority-based power evaporated instantly. The titles, the fear, the positional leverage, all disappeared when the org structure was threatened. Meanwhile, Sarah's influence-based power actually increased. Why? Because people trusted her judgment, valued her leadership, and actively wanted her to succeed. Her power wasn't dependent on organizational position. It was rooted in relationships and competence. This pattern repeats throughout history. Leaders whose power depended purely on fear or manipulation fell quickly when circumstances changed. Leaders who'd built genuine loyalty and created real value maintained influence even without formal authority. Think about it in concrete terms. If you lost your job title tomorrow, how much of your influence would remain? If you couldn't offer people anything transactional, would they still take your calls? If the organizational structure changed, would people actively try to keep you involved or quietly let you fade away? These questions reveal whether you have real power or just borrowed authority. Building resilience means investing in the assets that survive structural change. Genuine competence, strong relationships, a valuable reputation, the ability to create value in multiple contexts. It means building what Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragility power, that actually grows stronger during volatility rather than being dependent on stable conditions. Let's return to what Nietzsche actually meant by strength, because it's radically different from the ruthless domination interpretation. For Nietzsche, real strength meant self-mastery, the ability to control your own impulses, to choose your responses rather than reacting automatically. This is harder than dominating others, creating rather than destroying, building new value, new ideas, new possibilities rather than just tearing down what exists. This requires more courage and creativity. Taking responsibility without blaming others or circumstances for your situation, owning your choices and their consequences. This is more difficult than playing victim or tyrant. Affirming life including its difficulties, finding meaning in struggle, rather than becoming bitter or nihilistic. This requires deeper strength than cynicism. The person who embodies these qualities doesn't need to manipulate others, because they're not dependent on external validation. They don't need to dominate because they're already in command of themselves. They don't need to tear others down because they're building something of their own. This is radically different from the pseudo-Nietzschean might makes right philosophy that some people adopt. That's actually weakness, disguised as strength. Weakness that needs to dominate others to feel powerful, that needs external validation through fear or submission. Marcus's real transformation began when he shifted from trying to dominate others to genuinely mastering himself, from extracting value to creating it, from reactive manipulation to conscious value creation. This didn't make him soft. It made him legitimately powerful in a way his previous tactics never had. Marcus's journey from domination-based tactics to value-based influence took 2 years. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when his old patterns tempted him back, especially when he saw others using manipulation successfully in the short term. But something fundamental had shifted in his understanding. He realized that his previous success had been hollow. Yes, he'd climbed quickly, but he'd been constantly anxious, isolated, unable to trust anyone because he assumed they were as manipulative as him. His victories felt empty because he knew they were built on tactics rather than genuine achievement. Now, building his influence through competence, value creation, and strategic ethics, things felt different, slower initially, but more solid. He wasn't worried about people discovering his real self, because his reputation was authentic. He could actually trust some of his relationships, because they were built on mutual benefit rather than manipulation. When challenges arose, he had genuine allies. After the crisis passed, and the company stabilized under new ownership, Marcus wasn't given the top role that went to Sarah, and he could accept that because she'd genuinely earned it. But he was offered a significant position rebuilding a division, specifically because he'd demonstrated real change in his leadership approach. The new executive team had watched how he handled the crisis, and what they saw was someone who'd learned to lead through influence rather than authority, through value creation rather than political maneuvering. Most importantly, Marcus felt different, less paranoid, less hollow, more aligned with who he actually wanted to be. The power he was building now felt sustainable, not dependent on constantly maintaining dominance, but rooted in genuine competence and relation. We've explored a different understanding of power, one based on Nietzsche's actual philosophy, rather than distorted interpretations, on strategic ethics rather than naive idealism or cynical manipulation, on sustainable influence rather than fragile dominance. The world is complex. Yes, some unethical people succeed, at least temporarily. But if you look carefully at lasting, resilient power, you'll find it's usually built on genuine value creation, trustworthy relationships, and real competence. This isn't a fairy tale where good always wins. It's a realistic analysis of what actually works in complex human systems over time. So here's what I'm suggesting. Be strategic. Absolutely. Understand power dynamics. Don't be naive about human nature. Protect yourself from bad actors, but recognize that sustainable power comes from creating value, building trust, and developing genuine competence, not from pure manipulation or ruthless extraction. Build the kind of power that survives organizational changes, that strengthens during crisis, that compounds over decades. Build influence that's rooted in who you actually are rather than constructed through manipulation. If this perspective resonated with you, consider subscribe. The journey towards sustainable influence is ongoing, and we'll continue exploring how strategic thinking and ethical principles can align. And remember, the question isn't whether you should pursue power. The question is what kind of power you want to build. The kind that requires constant maintenance through fear and manipulation, or the kind that compounds through value creation and genuine relationships. That choice will define not just your success, but who you become in the process of achieving